So, thank you everybody for coming. I hope that you enjoy the presentation. I've been using layers ever since I bought my first copy of Photoshop back CS2, I think it was. I got a free copy with my scanner, which was quite a coup considering it's over $600 for just Photoshop. And I've toyed with it over the years. I upgraded from CS2 to CS3. I think it was only $50. And then once the cost of it got to be so exorbitant, there wasn't an easy method. I just continued to keep using CS2. And frankly, I could use CS3 now for everything that I do. As you'll see, I really use it rather simply. The concept of layers is really not that difficult, or it can be difficult depending on how complex you want to get. Some people do 15, 20, 100 layers in a photograph. I tend to use 3 or 4 or 5 and then wind up putting them all back into one photograph. And I rarely ever save a photograph with all the layers there. Lots of other programs use layers on one. Luminar, ACDC, GIMP. So this isn't a thing that's exclusive to Photoshop, but I'm going to illustrate it in Photoshop and Lightroom because that's the programs I use. There's such an overhead to learning a brand new program that I tend to stick with the things that work for me. I sometimes experiment with the other programs, but I always go back to the tried and true things. Without further ado, let's just jump into a copy. Let's see if I can share my screen here. I will share screen 2. That's the one I think I want to do. Hit share. And I have Lightroom up here. Let's go into Photoshop and let's create a new document. I'll just pick a kind of a random size document. Here, say create, and it will open up a copy with just the background. If you look down, here's my layers in the lower right-hand side. Here's my background layer. Your first layer is always called your background layer, and it's locked, meaning I can't move. Well, let me hit Control Z, meaning I can't move it around. Right now, the crop tool is enabled. So if I go to my move tool, well, I can move it now because I've changed it from a background layer to a regular layer. So it's just white on top of a transparent layer. Those little checkerboard patterns means that the layer is transparent. So if I just go back to my original layer, I have one layer. So let's create a new layer down here in the lower right-hand corner. There's a thing to create a new layer. That layer is now transparent, okay? I have a white layer underneath. I have a transparent layer on top called layer 1. On that layer, I'm gonna draw a box. Let's change the color to something like a bright red. And let me pick the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw a large box right here and fill it with red. Okay. So now I have 2 layers. I have my layer with the red rectangle in it, and I have my background layer, and I can turn them on and off by turning the little eyeballs off, right? So I'll turn them back on. And now I can take this rectangle and I can move it around and place it anywhere on this layer that I want, right? So let's make one more layer. Let's make a text layer, and I will just type on here. I'll type let's see here, I'll change the color to something like blue and get my move tool, and you can see I can move this text layer around anywhere I want. So now I have 3 layers. I'm going to make this a little bit more bigger, for fun. I'll go back to my text tool because Peter is great, can't be big enough. So 72, I'll do 100. Okay. So now I have the 3 layers. Here is my text layer. I can turn it on and off. Here is my rectangle layer. I can turn it on and off. And here's my background layer. I can turn it on and off. Each layer, as long as I click on the layer, I can move around independently, right? And I can even, let's put this one right on top of the other layer. I can even take and switch around. I can take this text layer and drag it underneath. And now it's disappeared because the rectangle layer is on top of the text layer. And if I turn it on and off, you can see it's underneath. In fact, if I come through here and I take the opacity and I set it to something other than, oops, I have to be on the rectangle layer. If I set the opacity to something less than 100%, you can see through the red square down to the down through the text layer. So I'll set it back up to 100%, and I'll take the text layer and I will move it around, and I'm going to create one more new layer, which is again blank, has nothing on it. You see, it doesn't make any difference. And I'm going to grab my brush tool, which is where's my brush tool? Right there. Okay, I'm going to change my color to something like green. Okay, and just quickly, I'm going to change the brush's property. I'm going to make it the size, the hardness 100%. I'll make it a soft round brush. Okay, and now I will paint on that layer with this brush. Okay, go back to my move tool. Again, here's the layer with the painting on it. Here's the layer with the rectangle on it. Here's the layer with the text on it, and then my background layer, right? So I can take this layer and I can move it underneath the rectangle layer, or I can move it underneath the text layer. Oops, grab it here and move it there, right? And I can take any of the layers and I can set their transparency so that you can see through to the layer below, right? Here, I'll do it with the text layer. I'll set the transparency on that, right? So I'll move them back up to 100%. And I'll take my layer with the squiggle on it and put it on top. And then I'm going to take a selection tool. Now there's lots of different selection tools. There's polygon, there's lassos, there's magnetic, there's squares. There's all different ways of selecting things. So I'm just going to take a random selection tool. I am on the layer with the paint on it, and I'm just going to go through here and I'm going to make a random selection, right, through the thing. I'm going to go back to my move tool, and you can see I can now move this around anywhere that I want, right? In fact, if I want to, I can take this one and do just like you would in a Word document. I can cut it, I can make a new layer, and I can go edit and paste, okay? In which case now this is independent. I can move it back to where it was, or I can move it anywhere I want on the layer. I can set the transparency on this layer so that you can see through things, okay? I can move this layer underneath the layer with the rectangle on it. Let's set the transparency of the rectangle back up to 100%. So this is just a quick example of what it's like to use layers. But we're photographers. This is more for graphic artists. So let's try something using these techniques in a photograph. So for me, I always go back to Lightroom. Let's take an image that I like. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to say edit in Photoshop. It's going to open up that document in Photoshop with a little luck. And there it is. Okay. And using some of these techniques, see, I've got a background layer here. I can't do anything to the background layer. I can't move it, can't do anything because it's locked. If I want to, I can convert it to a normal layer, in which case, Control Z, there we go. All right, I can just double click on it, convert it to a regular layer, in which case I can move it around. But my goal is to take and create a second layer with exact copy exact copy of this. So I now have two layers over here. Layer 1 and layer, 0 copy, and layer 1 copy. And I'm going to take this 1 copy, okay, and I am going to take and bring it into, I'm going to start it with an HDR effect using HDR Effects Pro. And with a little luck, it's going to start really soon. And we'll see. Come on, you can do it. You can do it, right? Maybe I didn't click on it before. There we go. This will just take a second. And what I'm going to do, there's all these different presets. I'm going to just go down the one that kind of radically changes this image. Let's see. Dark. Let's do tinted structure. No. Let's do this one. Okay. It's a kind of a radical approach. Let's take the saturation and we'll bring it way down. Okay. We'll say okay. And it's going to bring it back into Photoshop, and it has changed my top layer. So now this is my top layer, and here's the layer underneath it. If I think that this is too drastic, I can come through here and I can set my transparency, in which case now see what I've affected it just a little bit. If I think that's too little, I can come through here and raise it up to about 80%. So that's 80% transparency. That means that this layer here is transparent, right? And I'm looking through with 74% of the changes affecting the layer down below, okay? I'm going to take it and I'm going to raise it all the way back up to 100%, right? And one of the things I don't like about this image is this little light fixture over here. It just seems so incongruent with the rest of it. So I'm going to try to fix it by taking this doorway image and copying it over the light fixture. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make another copy of this layer, okay? And I am going to take my selection tool and I'll take the square one and I'm going to come here and I'm going to copy, boom, boom. I'm going to make a selection around this doorway, right? And I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to say layer, make a new copy of the layer via copy, okay? It made a new layer for me. And if I turn off all the other layers, you'll see all I have is that little doorway that I copied. I'll take the move tool and see I can move it around. All right, I'll turn back on my other layers. And I'm going to take this. I'm still on the same layer, so I can move this around. I'm going to take it and I'm going to say edit transform, free transform, and I'm going to kind of rotate it around. And I'm going to take it, I'm going to move it. Make this thing a little smaller here so we can see it. I'm going to put one of the points right there where right there. And then I'm going to go back up and I'm going to say edit, transform, warp. Okay. So, oops, that's not what I want. That's not the one I want. I want edit, transform, distort. There we go. That'll keep my line square. I'll move this point right here. And I'll move this point right here. In fact, I can move them back here like this. Okay. Double click, and there it is. Now see, here it's on a separate layer, so I can turn it on and off. And I can also use, well, first of all, I could set the transparency of it if I think it's too much. So see, now we can kind of see through to some of those light bulbs below, right? I can also set these blend modes. And there's a zillion blend modes, and some of them lighten, that they react from one layer to the other layer. They change how one layer reacts with the other one. Like this first one, darken, will take both layers and add them together. Multiply, color burn, see, does even more, linear burn. Lighten actually lightens one layer in relation to the other one. Screen, overlay. So a lot of times I'll just go through these blend modes and see if there's something that, so I kind of like that overlay, right? And here I can turn it on and off. That kind of reacts really nicely, doesn't it? If I'm 100% sure that this is what I want to do and I don't want to make any more changes, I'll go into here and I will say merge down, okay? Now, what that did is that took that layer, I can no longer move it around. That layer now has, it looks like I'm doing, like it's, but it's actually the whole image. See, so the whole image is together. Now I have three layers. I have this layer with the light switch on it. I have the layer without the light switch on it, and I have our original layer underneath, okay? So if I turn back on all the layers, now let's have a little bit of fun. Let's do exactly the same thing that we did here. Let's go through here. Boom, 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 okay? So I've selected that doorway again. This time I'm just gonna hit the delete key, and it looks like nothing happened. But if you can see here on the little thumbnail, you can see a little something happening. So if I turn off these other two layers, I've effectively just cut a hole, right? So let's go back into Lightroom. Let's have a little bit of fun. And I have this elephant, right, that I pulled out of one of my zoo pictures, and I did a really crude cutout around it. Not really very sophisticated, but for our purposes, good enough. I'm going to say edit in Photoshop, edit a copy. It's going to take me back into Photoshop, and it's going to make a new tab up here with just the elephant on. So I've got one tab that has the Peter is great thing. In fact, we're not going to keep that. We'll just get rid of that, and I'm not going to save it. We've got our room that we're working on with the cutout. In fact, I'm going to deselect that little layer here, and we've got a tab open with this image. I'm going to take my move tool. I'm going to grab the elephant. I'm going to go up to this layer here. I'm going to bring it back down, and I'm going to just drop it on the picture. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come up, and I'm going to do free transform. I'm going to make it a little smaller, right? Now the elephant, see, is on his own separate layer. There he is, right? Turn back on the other layers. Selected that layer so I can move him. I'm going to move him right here to the doorway. I'm going to make him a little smaller. Control T. I'm going to make him a little smaller yet. And my goal is to make him look like he's coming out of the doorway, right? So I'm going to take him and I'm going to move him underneath this layer. So now I have a layer with the cutout doorway, right? And I have the elephant underneath. And I can move the elephant over a little bit. That looks pretty good. Move him down a little bit. And now I'm going to go back to this top layer and I'm going to set the transparency down so I can kind of see the elephant through that layer, right? Okay. I'm going to make the image larger. And I'm going to take my eraser tool, okay? I'm actually going to go on this layer and I am going to erase. Let me see, I'll take my eraser up to 100%. So it's erasing everything that this eraser is following over, right? Like that. Erase this line right there. Come here, erase these guys. I'm going to erase where these are. And you'll see in a second what I've done, right? If I go back to this layer and I turn up the transparency to 100% and I turn off these other layers, you can see what I've done, right? I've erased this part. So let me turn back on the elephant here. And I'm going to continue erasing. Nice. Turn back on the bottom layer. Okay. Hit Control 0 to take it back to full screen. And I've got an elephant in the room, right? Okay. So let's have a little more fun. Let's do something a little more interesting. Let's take, let's go up. Well, let me just combine all these layers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just compress all these layers. I'm going to flatten them all down into one. Now I just have one layer and nothing moves, right? It's another background layer. Okay. I'm going to then copy this layer again. So now again, I have two layers. I'm going to go up to Filter, Luminar 4. Luminar 4 is going to start. And I am going to go, I could do all kinds of things with Luminar 4. I could set the temperature, and I could set the tint, I could set the exposure. It has some really interesting AI things where I could just set the AI, but that's not really what I brought the program for. I can do all these things in Lightroom and Photoshop, but it has this thing called sun rays. So I place the sun right where I want it. I'm going to place it right outside the doorway. I'm going to take the amount, do it up pretty high, right? Overall look, sun length, go into advanced settings. I think I'd like to set the sun rays warmth a little yellower to show that it's really yellow. And I'm just going to say done, apply. And it's going to save a copy of this and transform the top layer of my drawing in a second. And there it is. So there's my top layer with the Luminar thing, with the Luminar little program sun rays run on top of it. So to me, it's not realistic. The sun rays would not be coming up into the room. So I'm going to come back over here to the same thing. I'm going to take my brush. I'm going to make the brush a little bigger. I'm going to set the transparency on the brush so it isn't quite so harsh to about 50%. And I'm going to paint out where I think that the light rays would not be. I do not think that they would be here. I don't think they would be here. And if I look at my layer, you can see what I've erased, right? And I could even continue to keep erasing here. Turn back on my bottom layer. If I think it's too much, I can go back to my top layer and I can set the transparency a little bit. I can tone down those light rays. Or I can put them back up. I'm kind of an all or nothing kind of guy. So this is how to use layers. I think it works really, really well. I did want to show you one more interesting thing. If I go back into Lightroom, let's select another image. Let's select this image, say edit in Photoshop. There it is. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make a copy. So I now have two layers. Okay. I'm going to go into Luminar again. And let's see, it's starting. And this time I'm going to go into Creative again. And I'm going to go into Sky Replacement. And I'm going to replace the sky with, I'll just start at the top. Nice. How about a blue sky? Something more interesting. How about dramatic sky? Nice. How about dramatic sunset? Ooh, that's nice, huh? How about dramatic sunset number 5? No. How about galaxy? Ooh, we turned it into a nighttime shot. Pretty nice. Let's take Starry Night. That's nice, but let's be a little more realistic. Let's take, how about blue sky number 5? Well, maybe a little more than that. Blue sky number 4? No, blue sky number 2? There we go. I like those clouds. In fact, I'm going to make a note of that. Blue sky number 2. Number 2. So when I'm giving a lecture, now I can blend this a little bit more into the photograph. I can set the horizon. If I don't like the position of the clouds, I can raise and lower them. I can relight the scene. You see what it's doing? It's relighting the scene based on the sky, right? I can defocus. If I think the clouds are too sharp, I can defocus them. I think that they're fine. I can set atmospheric haze. So if I want to make it a little more hazy, I can set the sky temperature. If I think it's a little too blue or a little too, and I can set the exposure of it. Okay, I think that that's pretty good. And so I'm going to say apply. Again, we know what it's going to do. It's going to save a copy of this sky changed back into my Photoshop, right? And 1, 2, 3, magic. And so here underneath is my old layer. Here's my new layer. And I want to show you how good this is, okay? If you look closely, oops, I did a little too much, didn't I? if you look closely, in between all of the leaves, what a great job it did of masking and putting, here's a little cloud right in between the little spots in between there. No halos, right? It just did a wonderful job of Control 0. And if I think it's too much, remember I can always use that same trick where I can come through here and I can lighten it up. But I do think that it did a great job. So now for me, look, I've got 2 layers. The big deal here is I've got 2 layers. Each of those layers is 42 megapixels. So I effectively have doubled the size of my image. I don't see any reason for keeping an 82 megapixel image. So I usually just go flatten my image. I'm down to 1 layer, right? And then I'm going to close it down. I'm going to say, yes, I want to save it. I'm going to go back into Lightroom in a minute after it saves it, right? And go into Lightroom here, where I now have my original image and the one with the layers. And I could further go back through here and I could edit the image, right? I could set the clarity on it. I could set the black points on it a little bit. I could set the highlights, right? In other words, I could fine tune it. So there it is. There's 2 examples of how I use Luminar. Both of them have to do with using Photoshop. I think that's really it. I think we're really done here. It's probably close to a half an hour. So I'm going to unshare my screen, go back to me. Hello, everybody. Let me know if there are any questions, or if not, we can just start our giveaway or a round table or whatever. And I am going to stop my recording.